Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make some mini meatloaves with some honey cornbread muffins, fried potato, and cabbage. So let's start out by making the panade for our meatloaf. Now I find that the panade makes it the most delicious is because it instead of breadcrumbs, it's nice and soft. But I realized I forgot my slices of bread, so I'm going to grab my bread real quick and here we go. And you just need 2 slices of a soft bread. You don't want to have one with a really tough crust on it, or that won't really dissolve into your your panade very well. So I've got 2 slices of, again, a soft bread, and we're going to cover them with enough cream to make them soggy. And so this is the same base that we use when I make my meatballs or meatloaf, because it just gives the most tender and moist base to it. So just enough cream to make them soggy so that they'll break apart, but you don't want them dripping. Here we go. So I'm going to soak it all up. And since I'm using 2 pounds of meat, I'm going to use 2 slices of bread and 2 eggs. So 1 and 2. And then we're going to season up our base to our panade. We're going to use some powdered onion and put about a tablespoon in here. We're going to use a little bit of ground mustard, about, I want to say, a half a teaspoon. Now we are going to be using some in our sauce that goes on top as well, but a little bit to go in here. We're going to do about a half a teaspoon of ground black pepper.
You have a question? What is a panade?
It is a paste that you make from bread, cream, and eggs, and you use that in place of like breadcrumbs and eggs in a meatloaf or or meatball thing. So it just makes them more tender and less dry and spongy. Okay, we're gonna put in about 2 teaspoons of garlic salt, and I'll do a little bit more. And then I'm going to use part of a yellow onion. We're going to dice it up or mince it, and we're going to use a little bit of that in our meatloaf. The other part of this is going to go into our fried potatoes. So we'll take off this whole outer skin here. And I'm just going to cut it in half because we're only going to use half of it. And you want to cut your onions nice and small because you don't want to have really big chunks of onions in your meatloaf when you're eating it, because they won't get tender or let out their flavor as much. So we're essentially going to do a slice on here that's fairly close to a mince. Now I'm going to just go back over a couple of times with my knife. Here we go. And then we're going to toss this into our base for our panade. That way we can mix it around, and then when we incorporate it into our meats, it will be nice and flavorful. Okay, let me get my scissors out so that we're ready to cut it open. But I'm going to go in here with one hand, and we're going to squeeze our bread through our fingers and our eggs to make the base of our panade. And essentially, you just got to squeeze it through those fingers to spread all of those herbs around. And this is going to make your paste that you will then mix into your meat mixture. Here we go. And just make sure you get all of the crust broken up. Now you could always take off the crust and then use like 3 slices of bread instead, to make sure you don't have any crusty chunks. But I find as long as you're using a nice soft bread, those will really kind of break up enough. Okay, we've got the base of our panade here. And now we're going to add in our meat. So I've got 2 pounds of butcher blend, which is just a variety of cuts of beef that have been ground up. We're going to dump these in here. and then we'll mix them in. Here we go. So 2 pounds of meat, because again, we use 2 pounds of, or 2 eggs and 2 slices of bread. So I've got our first one in. And now we're going to use our second one. And then we can start mixing this up. There we go. Now, you can also use just straight up regular ground beef or ground chuck or a mixture of ground beef and ground pork. Those are all kind of lovely. Okay, we're going to go right in here with our mixture and kind of incorporate it up. And then what we'll do is we're going to shape these, we'll press them into our mini loaf pan and we'll bake them up. And I like to do them in the mini loaf pan because I find that your meat loaf doesn't dry out quite as much and it just cooks up a lot faster. A full loaf, when you do it in a full, takes like 45 minutes to an hour. While with this, it takes like 25 minutes to cook up.
You have a question. What's in the butcher blend?
It's just beef, but it's a variety of different beef cuts. So it's not just like ground beef or ground chuck, but it has different parts to it, which gives you a variety of like lean or tenderness to the meats and whatnot. But it is all beef, just different from different parts, which I find is great for meatballs and meatloafs, whatnot, because you do get a really nice tender blend. Here we go. And we're going to just squeeze this through until we have all of that base mixed in. And this is really important to make sure it mixes up because these are our spices. This is what seasons our main day. We are going to put a lovely glaze on top as well as some bacon, but most of this flavor is coming in through our seasoned panade.
And can you go over the season?
Yes. So we started off with our 2 slices of bread, 2 eggs, enough cream to make the bread soggy. And then we added in half of a minced onion, a tablespoon of onion powder, about 2 teaspoons of garlic salt, around a half a teaspoon of mustard powder, and a half a teaspoon of black pepper. So really, really kind of simple. And then we'll make our lovely glaze that adds just a whole another amount of flavor. Okay. Looks like we've got this well and mixed up here. So I'm going to grab my loaf pan and we can see if we can make our lovely things. And just start with a little bit and then kind of divide it between each one. And then I'll kind of push them down in there once I've got them all kind of divided so that they're all around the same size so they cook up evenly. And I will say start with a little less and then go back and even it out so you're not having to fish out and make them all more even. Here we go. And now I'm going to go back through with my little bits and then we'll even these out and then we'll press them down into our mini loaf shape. But these make perfect kind of personalized mini loaf pans, which with 2 pounds, since there's 8 of them, they'd be about a 1/4 pound each. Okay. Now we're going to just press them in so they have their nice shape. And then what we'll do is we're going to we'll put a little glaze on them and then our strips of bacon over the top. And then we will also brush it with a little bit more glaze. Put a little bit over here. And just make sure you kind of push it down in there so there's no voids in it. And if you have some that are a little bit less, just try to even them out again so they cook up so none get overcooked or undercooked. Okay. These are just about evened up. So I'm going to go wash my hands and then we can get on with the bacon and the glaze. Okay. So I do have my oven preheated to 350. So we will be cooking this off at a nice kind of 350, kind of a nice good medium temperature. Okay. Let's make our glaze. We're going to start with about I want to say like a half a cup of ketchup. I'm eyeballing it here. A little bit more. And then we're going to add in about tablespoon and a half of Worcestershire sauce. Gives it a nice, tangy, wonderful flavor to it. We're going to add in about a teaspoon of ground mustard. This gives it a nice kind of savory flavor. I want to make sure. Here we go. We're going to add in some onion powder. We're going to add in about a teaspoon and a half of onion powder. And then we're going to add in about a 4th cup of brown sugar. So this is almost going to have a nice like homemade barbecue taste to it. And I'm going to get a spoon here. We'll mix it up and then we'll put this over it. And then we will add some bacon over the top of it as well. And then we'll pop these in the oven. There we go. And we're going to put this right over, and we're going to spoon this over the top of our mini meatloaves. And then I'll spread it out in just a second, but I like to make sure I got a good dollop on each one. And then we're going to also then reglaze the top once we get our bacon on it. But I like to do it in kind of layers so that bacon gets this just wonderful flavor to it. Here we go. And it's just going to be lovely. It adds a little bit of sweetness, that barbecue flavor to it. Okay, now let me grab out my bacon here. Here, we'll just do a little slide up here. And I'm gonna cut my bacon strips so that they fit on, like, rest on top of the meatloaves here. Now we're also gonna use bacon in a couple of other things today, which will make it extra delicious. Here we go. And I'm gonna just say we'll cut them kind of into fourths. So each strip of bacon, cut it into 4 kind of equal sized pieces. And that way we can just take this bacon and kind of lay it over each piece of meat. And this is going to give it such a great flavor to the meatloaf, as well as kind of a nice crispy bacon on top. I will say more like a chewy candy glazed bacon, because you have that brown sugar and the ground mustard, which even if you don't like mustard, ground mustard doesn't give you that mustard flavor that you think of like with a yellow Dijon mustard or whatnot. It's a very lovely flavor. The ground mustard is very different. Okay. Let's get these on. Might have to cut one more slice. You see, we've got them kind of just covering up that whole top. I think it's easier than, you could always wrap your little meatloaf in it, but I just find that that's a lot of extra work that's not necessary. Here we go. We'll put this on here. Perfect. And then we're going to just brush that last bit of our glaze over the top, spoon it over. That way, again, you have it on both sides of it, which is going to make that bacon taste so delicious. We're going to use our bacon again a little bit more in just a second, but let me wash my hands. Okay, and we're just going to spoon our remaining bit of our over. Again, I'm just going to start with a little bit so I can evenly put it over all of our little meatloaves here. Here we go.
You know, question: have you made those appetizers that use bacon, crackers, and brown sugar?
Oh, I've seen them before. I've never actually made them. But they always look kind of so delicious. Honestly, you put bacon on anything and it's just looks delicious. Although I did once have a chocolate covered bacon and I thought I thought it was going to be gross, but it was actually pretty good. Or the maple candied bacon, that's also delicious. Here we go. So I've got that over. Let's go pop this in our oven. Again, I have my oven cooking at 350 because we're going to pop in some corn muffins here in just a second. And so they'll bake at 350 along with our corn muffins. Then we'll work on our potatoes and our cabbage. So we're going to pop this in here. And then when I put the corn muffins in, I'll set the timer and they both should be done. But these take about 25 minutes, to 30 minutes max at 350. You could cook them higher if you wanted to for it. But, you don't need to, they'll cook up pretty quickly. So let's start with our corn muffins here. So I have our butter here. So we need about 2 tablespoons of butter. And we're doing a small batch of our corn muffins because I didn't have quite a whole cup of cornmeal, but I really wanted corn muffins with my meatloaf. So we're doing a kind of a half batch. 2 tablespoons of our melted butter. Get a little spoon out here. And then we're going to use the full recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk, but we are going to just do half that. So just a little over a half a cup of buttermilk. Now, if you don't have buttermilk, what you can do is take cream and add a little squeeze of fresh lemon to it. And that's going to give you the texture and the little bit of that tanginess that buttermilk has, which is what I'm using right now because I very rarely have buttermilk, but this works as a perfect kind of balance it out. I'm going to give this a nice little mix. And then let me grab out 1 egg. There we go. So the full recipe calls for 2, but the half just 1. We're going to mix this in here. So I'm going to pop my yolk and we'll mix it into our butter and our cream with lemon or buttermilk, whatever one you want to use. There we go. And just make sure that egg gets mixed in there. And we want to minimize when we start adding the cornmeal and the flour in, we want to not mix it quite as much. So we're going to hold back, but when it's just the liquid parts, mix away. We're going to add in a 1/3 cup of sugar. Now, if you want a more kind of a little molassesy flavor to it, you can switch this out for brown sugar, and they're both delicious. So 1/3 cup of sugar, and then we're going to add in a tablespoon of honey. We will also be using honey in our glaze that we're brush over it. We've got some honey butter that will melt and brush over it when we're done baking it. So I just eyeball my tablespoon of honey because honey is sticky and it's a challenge to mix out, but just a good kind of kitchen spoonful. I feel like this is one where you can be a little off and it's not a big deal. Okay, we'll save this here because we are, again, going to use a little bit more honey in just a second. And then we're going to add just like a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda because, again, the full recipe just requires a 1/2 teaspoon. And then we're going to add in about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Let's give this a good mix. Then we'll add in our cornmeal. And lastly, we will add in our flour. So we've got all of our wet parts mixed together here. And this is, I will say, one of the best cornbreads. It's one of those nice, sweet, just honey butter cornbread. It's just so delicious. My kids absolutely love this cornbread.
I do have a question. Could you use honey instead of honey and sugar?
The problem is when if you use all honey, it's going to mess with the liquid content in yours. So you'd have to kind of work with your flour and your cornmeal ingredients to make up for that extra moisture in here. So I find that the mixture of both the sugar and the honey just gives the best texture when it bakes up.
And do you make a cornbread stuffing for Thanksgiving?
I do not make a cornbread stuffing. And this is be funny. This our stuffing that we have is nothing fancy. This is just what I grew up eating, and so I just use my mom's base for it. But it's like the Pepperidge Farm stuffing that you buy in a bag, and then we jazz it up and we stuff our turkeys with it. But it is nothing like fancy, bougie, homemade. But it's when you've had something you've had since you were a kid, you can't mess with it because it's the same thing. We have like crescent rolls. Got to have crescent rolls. They're not the best thing, but you always have them there, and your little corn and butter and whatnot. Just some things that are always stay the same. Okay, and then we're going to add in a half a cup of all-purpose flour. We're going to mix these until they're just combined, and then we can spoon them out and we'll bake them up. And these take, again, about 20 minutes to bake up, maybe a little bit less. So I'll probably set my timer for right around 18 minutes just to check on them. And that's when our meatloaf should be pretty much done. So just mix them until they're just combined. You don't want to overmix or you'll have a stiff muffin. There we go. And again, this is a half batch. And I'm just doing my outer ones because they will actually bake more evenly than the inside. Okay, let me grab a spoon. We'll spoon these in. And then we'll have them off to bake. Now, a lot of times I do these also in like the mini loaf pans, which make little mini cornbread loaves, which is wonderful. You can also do this in a like an 8x8-inch pan or whatnot. And that takes a little bit longer to cook, which is why I love either the mini loaves or the muffins. So we're going to start by going here, and then we will even them out for each one. And this, again, is our honey cornbread. Now, we added just a little bit of honey now, but what's really going to make these even more delicious is that once they're baked, we brush them with a honey butter. And that is what's going to make them amazing. So we're spooning them in nice and full. And again, this is a half batch, so we're just doing a small batch of these. And that's because I really wanted corn muffins with my meatloaf today. Now, I guess you could have stretched this out further and filled them up less. But for me, if you're going to have a muffin, it needs to have a good dome on it. So let's even them all out. And then these are going to go into the oven and bake at 350 for about, we're going to do it for like 18, 19 minutes. And they should be pretty close to being done around then. Okay. Let's go pop these in. And again, when you're baking, if you're doing a smaller batches, bake on the outside before you bake on the inside. The inside gets the least amount of heat because it doesn't have as much direct. We're going to put these right on the top, right next to our meatloaves that are cooking up wonderfully. And I'm going to set my timer for 18 minutes. And now let's go make our fried potatoes and our fried cabbage, and then we'll make our honey butter glaze to go on top. Okay, so I'm actually going to be cooking both my potatoes and my cabbage in bacon because they're just, who doesn't love fried potatoes with bacon and fried cabbage with bacon? So we're getting the bacon and everything. So I'm going to start by just snipping it up because, again, we want little strips in here. And I'm not using a whole lot of bacon, but, you know, just a couple strips for each one. And primarily it's the bacon grease that you want to fry it in. That's what's going to make it really nice and give it such great flavor. And I feel like it's going to bring everything together.
You have a request to go over the cornbread?
Yes. So the cornbread is, it's a honey butter cornbread, and we made a half batch of it. We started out with about 2 tablespoons of melted butter. Then we added in a little over a half a cup of buttermilk, or you can do cream with a squeeze of lemon juice in it, and 1 egg. Mix those all together. Then you're going to add in a 1/3 cup of sugar, a tablespoon of honey, a little, like a 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 a teaspoon of salt. Mix all of those up together. And then you're going to add in a 1/2 cup of cornmeal and a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. Mix those until they're just combined. And voila, you have your delicious cornbreads ready to bake in the oven. And the muffins you would do at 350 for 18 to 20 minutes. Mini loaves a little bit longer, 20 to 22. If you want to do it in a pan, that's going to take like 30 minutes. Takes a lot longer. There we go. Okay, we've got our bacon in here. We're going to let these cook up on both of them. And while we're waiting for those to cook up, I'm going to prep my potatoes and my onions and all that jazz, and then we'll get our cabbage going. So I'm just going to do a small dice on our onions. These are just going to add great flavor to our potatoes. Get that going. And then I have 4, this one's a huge, so it's like 5 Yukon potatoes. I'm going to keep the skin on the Yukon potatoes because they add just a really great, they're really tender, and you don't have to do the like peeling of it. And since I want these to cook up fairly quickly, I'm going to do a small kind of dice on them or cubing of them so that they get tender and cook up pretty fast. Here we go. So again, almost like a home style hash browns or home fries. Like when you go to a little like breakfast diner, they have their little fried potatoes. That's essentially the size I'm going for. Now, let's get our next potato here. And we're going to cook this in our bacon grease. I might add a little bit of butter if I need to. Okay. If you're not a big skin fan, then you could, I would say, peel up, and you could use either Yukon or you could use russets. I will say both those potatoes make really great fried potatoes. I'm doing the Yukon today because I feel like they're a bit more waxy, hold their shape a little better. And I think their flavor complements the barbecue flavors of meatloaf really well. And we'll get these.
Do you have a question? Do you ever use bacon up?
I have not ever used that before. I love bacon grease, like the flavor it adds, but I typically only ever use it if I'm using bacon in whatever I'm cooking. I will say that's when I go camping. I think that's one of the reasons why the kids love camping food so much, because almost everything is cooked in some form of bacon grease on there. And then I will say, if we do, I'll do fried potatoes with bacon, but the only other time we really have bacon will be if I do like a brunch with bacon in it, which is always lovely. I feel like growing up, you either grew up in a family that ate sausage or that ate bacon, and I felt like my family was the sauce, like they always ate sausage. That was always a part of our Sunday, but bacon rarely was. And I never really had bacon that much growing up. But as an adult, I do believe I love bacon a lot. I still remember I was like a teenager when I had my first BLT. and I was like, oh, this sandwich is delicious.
Do you have a question? Are any of your kids interested in cooking?
They have shown some interest. I will say my not my oldest, but my oldest son, Torin and Evie, both are interested. They love to they always love to help out my mom cooking in the kitchen. So when they spend the night at their house, my mom always has them make like Swedish pancakes and everything together. And they'll sometimes help me out in the kitchen for it. But they are interested. I will say Torrin said he's always really proud because he's like, I know how to make scrambled eggs. And I was like, well, you know how to cook more than your father. So I will say I think they definitely have some interest in there, and I think they will end up. I think they will. I think Torrin, he is the kid. He has this amazing palate, and he can taste any flavor that you add in the different components. Like he can pick up, he'll be like, oh, I taste a citrus note to this, or I taste it, So he's really good at that. We've got our bacon crisping up here, which is going to be done in just a second. It looks like my not my celery one, my cabbage one is just about ready here. Beautiful. I'm going to keep the bacon in so that it gets nice and tender and flavorful with it. I turn it all the way down to low. This one. And then since my cabbage one is ready, I'm going to start shredding up my cabbage. I feel like I made coleslaw recently with this cabbage. We did it in our lo mein last night. And then one of my favorite things is just a good old fried cabbage. I love it. I think it tastes amazing. And so we'll do that because it's just so good. And I think with the barbecue sauce and the bacon, I feel like the cabbage just plays a really great flavor with it. So we'll toss these guys and and then we will season them up, but I like to season them towards the end of cooking them so they don't get too, the spices don't burn on the bottom of the pan. Okay. I think since these 2 potatoes actually made a whole lot, we're going to throw them in now. We'll get our onions in. Give them a quick stir, and then we're going to throw in our potatoes. So we're going to let our onions just cook up just for a second or two in our bacon grease. There. I always say onions always need a minute or two just to kind of get their flavor out before you throw in the potatoes. Okay. We're going to get our potatoes in. Get this little piece of cabbage over there. And then we're going to toss these guys in all of that bacon grease to really bring up the flavors. And again, I'm not going to season up these potatoes until towards the end so none of those spices burn on the bottom of my pan. But I want to coat them. And then I'm going to move my temperature up to about a 5. And we're going to cover them with our skillet top here. Okay. Let's give our cabbage a little bit of a stir here. I think I'm going to add a little bit more because it shrunk down some. And I have a good amount left. So we'll add in just a few more pieces. And then we're going to prep up our sourdough starter. I'm going to feed it for tonight so that I can whip up. I'm thinking about maybe making English muffins for breakfast tomorrow. So I'm going to feed it so that I can make the dough, because when I make sourdough English muffins, you prep up the dough the night before and it sits on the counter overnight as it proofs. And then you shape them in the morning, and then we'll cook them up. So add a little bit more cabbage in there. Let me grab my 2 starters here. And I grab my spatula. I've got my flour. So if you ever want to make sourdough bread or whatnot, you have to have a starter. And with your starter, you've got to feed it, and it has to be active for when you want to make your dough with it. So we're going to discard a little bit, and I'm going to save this discard so that I can use it for something in tonight's dinner. I'm not sure what, but I'm going to make some with it. I don't want to just throw it away. But anytime you need to feed it, you've got to discard a little bit of it, or your starter will continue to grow and grow and grow. So I used a little bit of this starter yesterday, but we're going to put it in a bowl so we can save it, because I like to bring it down to where I have less than a cup of starter in my jar. And that's just so I don't have to use so much flour and water for each one. And then we're going to add in, we'll bring this down nice and low. Now this starter, you can cover it with, if you're going to use it right away, you can cover it with some like saran wrap and put it on the kitchen counter. Or if it's going to take a couple days, you can pop it in the fridge. If it's going to be more than a week before using it or your discard, make sure you put it in the freezer. Now, discard isn't going to, you can't use discard to make bread because it has to be active, but you can always use it to make a new starter with it, or in one of our many recipes like scones and biscuits and whatnot. I'm going to add a cup of flour to each one of my jars here. And that's why I always do it, because when I'm feeding it, I like to do the 1 to 1 to 1. So like 1 cup of discard to 1 cup of flour to 1 cup of water. Although I typically shortchange the water and do a little bit less, because I will say I always look more for the consistency of my starter versus how much. And the longer between your feedings with a sourdough starter, the more liquidy your starter gets because it eats up that flour. So if I'm waiting 3 days between a feeding, then my starter is going to be more liquidy than if it had only been a day. Okay. Let's give our potatoes a flip. Then we're going to add water into our starters and feed them up. There we go. So we're going to kind of scrape it under and flip it over. Now, cooking our potatoes with the lid on is going to allow them to get tender a little faster. I will finish them off with the lid off to take out some of that extra moisture. Now, we're going to push it down. Here we go. And let me grab our water. So I'm going to start, I have just shy of 1 cup in here. I'm going to pour about half of it in first, and then I start mixing, because again, I'm looking for the right kind of texture or viscosity to it versus just blindly using measurements. I want it to be not super liquidy that it's super runny, but I also don't want it to be so thick that it looks like sourdough bread like dough, which is a pretty high hydration one. And then you're just going to mix it up on there. Here we go. Add it in here. So I will say I didn't even use all of that, but we're getting pretty close to it. There we go. So it's kind of got a nice little liquid dropping texture to it. And that one's nice and fed. We'll put our lid, our cover on it. You can use cheesecloth, or you can get these fancy little covers. And that's going to prevent things from going into it, but allows the natural gases to escape. Let's get our same thing right here. I will say, for if you are only interested in making like 1 to 2 loaves of sourdough a week, or just minimum 1 at a time, a small jar like this works. But if you're going to be making more than 1 or 2 loaves at a time, you're going to want the bigger jars, or have multiple jars, because certain recipes will use a good amount of sourdough, and you don't want to get down to where you have to wait like 2 or 3 days before you can make a loaf if you like to make it more often. I know there's some people who make them in those really big jars, but I find these 2 jars work really well for our family. And I make probably 4 or 5 loaves of sourdough a week. And then on top of that, I make sourdough rolls, different sourdough things with using it.
Yeah, question. How long would the starter be good for in the fridge?
In the fridge, between feedings, which is when you give it more flour and water, it can go up to 10 days. After that, then you risk kind of killing off that really good, healthy bacteria that causes that fermentation process. Here we go. And on the counter, I say max between feedings is about 3 days because, again, it cooks up, like it uses up the flour and the energy source in it faster. Now, you can keep your discard in the freezer, but if you want to reuse that to repopulate a starter, it's going to take still like 4 or 5 days of feeding before it's going to be active enough to make it. And always when I do mine in the freezer or the refrigerator, I always give it a feeding before I use it, like a good, like 2 feedings. So one, like a bring it back to life feeding, and then the feeding right before I'm to use it. Okay, we're going to add in our spices now. We're going to use a little bit of onion powder. We're going to put, for these potatoes, about 2 teaspoons. I'm going to add a little bit to my cabbage as well because it just makes it taste so great. And then a pinch of black pepper and a little bit of garlic salt. We're going to throw in some green onions at the end. Now, you don't need quite as much salt if you were cooking as if, because of the bacon, but if you cook in oil, you might want to add a little bit more. And then we're going to add again a nice sprinkle into our thing. That was probably about a half and maybe close to a teaspoon. So a half a teaspoon in there and a teaspoon in here.
Why do you prefer garlic salt over garlic powder?
So garlic salt and garlic powder have very different textures. And I find that the garlic salt, I like that flavor a little bit better and it's not gritty. And so I use it in replace of salt because I find that it just adds nice kind of a really flavorful saltiness to it on there over using the powder. There we go. And now let's get these kind of tossed up. And then we're going to start melting our butter and our honey because our stuff is going to be just about ready. Let me get this all mixed up. Oh, as I say that, it sounds like it's beeping here. We put our lid on our starter. And let's go over and grab our thing. Beautiful. Okay. We've got our gorgeous honey butter cornbread. I'm going to leave our meatloaves in there. And then what I like to do, since we did this on 350, I'm going to change this to my air fryer for just a few minutes. And this is to make the bacon nice and crispy. You don't need it long, but nice and crispy. Here we have our gorgeous cornbread muffins. They've got a nice kind of golden brown color. That is from the honey inside the muffin, which makes it, again, just this lovely, delicious kind of golden brown color to it. If you use, I used white sugar, but if you use brown sugar in it, it will be even more brown on there. But again, it has this nice golden color because of that natural sugar in there. I'm going to start melting our butter. We need about 2 tablespoons of butter here. Let's get a little bit more in there to make it around 2 tablespoons. We're going to melt it and we're going to add our honey in there. You just need a tablespoon of honey and then we're going to brush them over our muffins. But I'm going to let them cool off a second and I'll pop them out so that they don't stick everywhere. Okay, beautiful. Our potatoes are nice and tender and they have, they're getting this golden, like kind of brown to it. They've all gotten to be pretty much translucent. We don't have any more super opaque ones, which means they're going to be nice and tender yet crispy. Beautiful. Our bacon and our cabbage is looking fabulous. We're starting to get some nice kind of brown sauteing on it. Now I'm going to add in my honey here. Now that I have a little bit of butter on the bottom of my pan on there. The trick is with the honey and the butter is to make sure that you don't cook it for too long because otherwise it's going to kind of turn into a honey candy. So just about a tablespoon in there. We're going to give this a good mix up. Let that melt up. And then we're going to brush this over our corn muffins. And this is what's going to really make these amazing. There we go. Perfect. I'll let that simmer there. Since we're down to the back things, I'm going to turn that off since we've got our cabbage and our bacon just about ready. And our potatoes. Beautiful. You can see we've got these nice crispy edges on there. So we're going to add in our last bit of our green onions, and then we will be able to brush our corn muffins, and I'm going to take my little mini meatloaves out of the oven here. So we have 2 green onions that we're just going to snip in here. This is going to add a really lovely fresh onion flavor to the fried potatoes, which I think is just makes them delicious.
You have a question? Do you only use stainless steel pots and pans?
No. So I have well, I guess these are coated. So yes, they base are stainless steel, but these are the hex clad, so they have that coating on it. Let me turn off my honey here. But I have my all clad and my hex clad. I do what is it, Le Creuset, which is a Dutch oven, a cast iron, which is a lovely pan as well. But I don't use any copper for cooking, mainly because when I got married, I was gifted a pretty good, ooh, perfect. I got a little spillover on the bottom of my oven, but look at that nice candied caramelized bacon on here. Gorgeous. But I got gifted a nice big set of all clad stainless steel pots and pans for my wedding gift. And so I have yet to, they've lasted me 17 years and they are wonderful. So I haven't replaced any because they've been perfect. Now, I do love the look of copper, and copper does cook well. My mom has a couple copper pots that I've used, but it's one of those things where if you don't need to replace them, I'm not going to. We're going to take out our cornbread muffins here. Beautiful. But you see the last few minutes in that oven on that air fryer gives you this candied bacon from that brown sugar in there, which is wonderful. Okay, I'm going to brush our cornbread muffins over here. Now, remember the honey gives our cornbread muffin a more of a golden brown color to it versus if you use just sugar in there. Here we go. It's the same thing when we do like our honey bath on our bagels. Gives a nice rich color. And we're going to brush these over. And you want to brush them a couple of times to really let this really soak in. Beautiful. Okay, let's get ready to serve up our lunch here. I'm going to turn off and okay, we've got those. Let me grab a little spatula to get these little meatloaves out. Now, I will say most of the time we'll eat about 2 mini meatloaves per person. I always like lunch times are my smaller sizes. So here we've got our first mini meatloaf with our bacon and our homemade little kind of a brown sugar and sweet tangy sauce on it. We will serve these with a good helping of our bacon fried potatoes with green onions and seasoned with onion powder, garlic, salt, and a little bit of black pepper. Our bacon fried cabbage or braised cabbage, which is one of my favorites, uh, to have. And then, of course, we have a delicious golden brown honey butter cornbread muffin, which really complements the sweet flavors in the glaze of the meatloaf. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made, and you can watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadget that we use in the kitchen. I've got my hex clad pans, my all clad pans, my knives, my spatulas, all the different gadgets I use. So you can check those out as well. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.